G'day, this is how to adjust the pitch, uninstall and install your Hydralign Senior model propeller. Okay, so this one we're working on here is a sail drive, so I'll be particularly showing you how to install on a sail drive. First thing you need to do if you're doing a pitch change or removing to change an anode or anything like that, is you need to recognise which hand the propeller is set up, so which way it rotates to push the boat forwards. All of our Hydralign propellers have a straight leading edge. So if you roll it to one stop and you think about it rotating, the propeller rotating in the direction of the straight leading edge, which way is it pushing water? In this case it's going to push it backwards, so the boat forwards. So when it's rotating to do that, it's going clockwise, so it's a right hand clockwise propeller. The opposite is when it's rotating in the opposite direction, left hand, it's pulling the boat backwards because it's pushing water forwards. Alright. So, first thing to do is to remove this cone anode on the back. It's just got an M8 socket headed cap screw holding it on. Then next thing to do is if you remove 7 of the 8 socket headed cap screws from around the circumference here, we then get a screwdriver or something that will fit down that M8 hole, and cocked over to one side, just push a little bit of pressure onto the pinion in the middle. You do that so that the pinion doesn't come with the blade assembly, and so you don't lose the pitch of the propeller, because obviously you want to put it together the same hand and the same pitch. So in this instance, because it's all in the vertical plane, I don't need to use the screwdriver. I can just pull the blade assembly off, and there you go. So there's the pinion, and the reason I say cock it off to one side a little bit is because if you go straight down the middle you miss the pinion altogether and it can still come off. So a little bit cocked off to the side just to maintain a little bit of pressure on it. Righto, so you know that it's a right hand propeller. The next thing you need to know is what pitch it was set on. In this case we have a single datum mark on the pinion. There's no other datum marks there. So the single datum mark means that this propeller has a single datum whether it's right or left hand. If it had the single datum and then somewhere else it had 2 dots, the single datum's the right hand datum on the pinion and the 2 dots are the left hand datum on the pinion. Okay, so single dot, right hand datum. In this case there's also the datum on the hub, and in this case going from that datum we've gone anti-clockwise to 6, which means we've got what we call a -6 pitch setting. It's minus because it's opposite the direction of rotation, remembering that this is a clockwise rotating propeller. So we've got a -6 pitch setting. So you want to write that down somewhere or something, just so you keep that in mind. You can grab a rag and you can pull the pinion out. To remove the rest of the propeller is fairly simple. You remove this little M6 grub screw in here, then the propeller nut can be undone and taken away. Then the propeller on a sail drive like this will slide off. Now you've got to be a bit careful when you slide it off, because there'll be a wire cutter, or a line cutter rather, and possibly a spacer behind it. So you just don't want to lose them. Right, so the next thing you want to do is the install. Now if you're installing for the first time, you want to be aware that you can't have the propeller sail drive shaft protruding beyond this shoulder here, because the nut needs to pull the propeller onto the shaft. Otherwise, if it protrudes, the nut will do up on the shaft, not the propeller, and it'll be able to slide back and forth. So if it does protrude, you will have been supplied these spacer washers, and you can find a combination which will mean that there's maybe 1 millimetre or 2 for the nut to take up between the shaft and the hub of the propeller. Then the propeller nut gets screwed on. Doesn't need to be done up ridiculously tight because it's a hardened shaft and you can snap the thread off the end, as you can see. The M6 grub screw is put back in when one of these 4 slots lines up with one of the 2 tapped holes in the hub. So the M6 grub screw is to lock the nut so it can never undo and the propeller can't fall off. Next, you want to put the pinion back in. Now if you're just reinstalling, obviously the datum goes back to the same spot, -6. But let's say you wanted to have a little bit less pitch. You'd go opposite direction of rotation to reduce the pitch to -8, or if you wanted more pitch, you go in the direction of rotation to say -4, -2, whatever it might be. But you do have to stick to the stamped numbers. In this case, let's put it on the datum. So, you then rotate the hub, which is the bit in the centre, clockwise, and the collar, the bit on the outside, anti-clockwise until it hits the stop like that. There'll also be an R stamped here which will line up with this datum here. That's for a right hand propeller. You then take the blade assembly and you line up all the R's and dots with the dots on the body. R and dot on the blade, dot on the body, all the way around. Okay, then you find the face of the blade assembly that has the datums, the side of the collar that has the datum, and slide the whole lot together like so. Might take a little wiggle of the blades to get it to drop in. Just stick one of the 8 socket-headed cap screws back in about halfway, like so. Check that when you feather the propeller in this position here, all the blades do line up, and if one is out, all it means is that you need to repeat the last step. Just be a bit more careful about how the blades are lined up with the datums. So then to finish it off, you put back in all the 8 socket-headed cap screws nice and tight. Before you put the anode back on, put the 8mm grease nipple that we've supplied in the M8 hole here. That's the hole that the bolt goes through to retain the anode. Pump that part of the propeller full of grease until you see it coming out around the blade journals. And you take the grease nipple out, roll the propeller back and forth, wipe away the excess, put the anode on, and put the socket-headed cap screw in. Obviously that gets nipped up fairly tight. Then on the forward end of the propeller here, you'll see there's this M8 grub screw. That comes out, grease nipple goes in, pumped full of grease until you see it come out here or around these socket-headed cap screws. Then the same thing, grease nipple out, roll it back and forth, wipe away the excess, and then the little M8 grub screw goes back in. That's how you set up your Hydralign 3-blade Senior.